There are slurs. This is it, right? Okay.
You run a modestly successful YouTube channel, and given the current political reality, you're thinking of doing some videos on the alt-right. Let's say you've been trying to understand the alt-right for some time and would like to do a series that tackles the big questions. What are the rhetorical strategies the alt-right uses to legitimize itself and gain power? How do these strategies work? Why do they work? How do we keep from falling for them? And, importantly, how do we catch ourselves when we start using them too? You're thinking of calling this series the Alt-Right Playbook. Setting aside that any lefty who makes a YouTube series with alt-right in the title will see their life go to hell, there are three things you'd have to clarify from the get-go. First, what is the alt-right? For clarity's sake, you'd have to tell people that the alt-right is a pack of loosely aligned groups and individuals that have existed for quite a while at the peripheries of American conservatism, but have recently gained footholds in the Republican Party proper. The term alt-right implies more or less what you think it would, positioning themselves as the young, edgy nirvana to the antiquated motley crew of 70s and 80s conservatism. They seek to replace and critique the likes of Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan for being, let's not mince words here, not reactionary enough. The alt-right, the people who adopt the label and those who just parrot their talking points, has high overlap with white supremacist think tank the National Policy Institute, Stormfront and the Ku Klux Klan, Breitbart News and various sections of 4chan, 8chan, and Reddit, sections of the asshole atheist community, anti-feminist YouTube, pickup artists and rape apologists, the not all men, all lives matter and Gamergate crowds, and basically anyone who uses the terms social justice warrior or virtue signaling unironically. Not everyone in these groups is in the alt-right, but the alt-right traffics at the intersection between them. There's a wide range of differing and frankly incompatible ideas about government and the social order among these groups, but as it gains power, the alt-right is congealing into a somewhat cohesive ideology. And the reason they matter at this moment in history is that of all the people in the 2016 primaries, only one was the alt-right candidate. And while not everyone who voted for him is in the alt-right, they are his base, his most ardent supporters, and they carried him all the way to the White House. Next, you'd want to clarify why they're called the alt-right. Alt-right is a term coined by National Policy Institute president, avowed white nationalist, and professional speedbag Richard Spencer.
Frames.
The term is meant as a euphemism, a way of painting a happy face on racism. And that's not an opinion. One of the stated aims of Spencer's organization is the removal of non-whites from American society. And the purpose of rebranding white supremacy with a term like alt-right is so mainstream white people are not made to feel like racists when they vote for racist people with racist policies. So every time a journalist writes an article about the dapper fashions of the alt-right and doesn't title it Lipstick on a White Supremacist Pig, that journalist is being a coward and treating a hate group with kid gloves basically because the hate group asked them.
That goes back to that piece that we read a couple days ago, talking about how right now journalists are feeling the pressure to maintain balance between left-wing and right-wing politics. And that can be incredibly difficult because from an objective perspective, the antics that we're seeing from representatives, pundits that are part of the conservative project on mainstream media, that are in Congress, they are much more radical, they are much more nonsensical, and it can be really difficult to objectively report on their antics without them calling themselves victims of cancel culture, of being misrepresented, because they lie, they cheat, they use inflammatory language, and liberal mainstream media outlets do it as well, but the harm that they intend to inflict, the misinformation that they tend to promote, the output of their game is to radicalize more people to the right, expand the Overton window and move it further to the right, and get more ground game and mobility behind their right-wing conservative project. And they have been quite effective in doing that, right? By calling out journalists who are just honestly trying to tell the story and have to be incredibly careful, walk on eggshells in the way that they are telling the story without getting that unfortunate and almost inevitable blowback from anyone who will call this some sort of unwanted, undue an attack, because they are not accepting the nonsense, the inflammatory language, the outright lies that are projected by members on the right. They're effective because it takes work to be non-reactionary. Yes, simply put, that's true.
Too. So, you might want to clarify why you put that euphemism in the title of your videos. And, well, you'd have to explain that while the alt-right is racist, they are not only racist. They're also misogynist, anti-feminist, Islamophobic, xenophobic, homophobic, transphobic, classist, ableist, authoritarian, and fiercely anti-intellectual. So if you just did a find and replace of each instance of alt-right with white supremacist, you'd actually be leaving a lot out. That's not much of a defense for the term alt-right, it just paints a happy face on a bunch of horrible stuff, but it is useful to have a term that refers to the whole cluster, and you don't have the kind of internet pull where if you coined your own term, anyone would know what you're talking about. So you'll just have to promise not to use alt-right as a euphemism. When the alt-right is racist, you will have to call them racist. When the alt-right is homophobic, you'll have to call them homophobic. If you're stuck with their term,
and that is what they push back against. They will act homophobic. They will act classist. They will act misogynistic. And if you say you are acting or behaving like you are a misogynist, they fight back and say, no, I'm not, and now I am offended because you have thwarted words at me that I do not agree with. That is exactly what I was trying to convey, and that is precisely what was written about in that work that we had read a few days ago. That is the engagement that you tend to have, right? How do you have conversations if they are demanding that you leave room for their voices in a public space, that open dialogue and political discourse is the only way to find any semblance of common ground? Then you have to put up with their bullshit. And if you are a leftist, we're at the point where we collectively say, no, we're not dealing with your bullshit. Why would we? Liberals, however, they are willing to try to reach common ground because they want to come across as though they are civil. And that is what really differentiates a leftist from a liberal at this juncture, and how they handle, especially in the public sphere, right? Which is one of the better metrics to determine, whether or not somebody is a leftist without them outright saying, I am a leftist. How they do engage with those on the alt-right, which usually is not at all, or it's abundantly clear that you know where you stand. The alt-right wingers give people a home for people who aren't 100% pure. No, you're wrong. You are not paying attention, my nuts are small. Alt-right wingers are incredibly exclusionary in who they allow in their circles. You are mistaken. You are wrong. They couldn't be less of what you've just described.
Use it the way they want you to. Third, you'd have to cover how to engage with the alt-right, which is actually pretty straightforward. Don't. The reasoning there may not be immediately obvious, especially if you, say, once devoted an entire video to the importance of talking to anti-feminist hate mobs. So you'll have to explain. You have since then learned how such debates with the far—
Yeah, the alt-right is like, hey, if you're not perfect, if you spew hate speech, you just can't help yourself. If you drop the N-word every 2 words and you can't help yourself, if you hate women and you can't help yourself, we will still accept you into our crowd, into our circle, even though you are not the most pure Like, you, yes, I thought we kind of knew that. Being pure is bad. Horseshoe theory must be centrist, otherwise alt-right, mind-blowing. I don't even know if that's what they're saying. I think that what my nuts are small is alluding to is that there's a lot of gatekeeping on the left, and some members of organizations or just online, they might be a little skeptical of who is trying to now enter leftist spaces, because the proliferation of crypto fascism, first and foremost, and a little bit of grifting, I think leaves a lot of people who have been devoted to leftism for quite some time feel like it's important to make sure that you don't have bad faith actors using the principle of inclusionary participation in most leftist spaces to kind of enter for the wrong reasons and in bad faith. And I really think that's what My Nuts Are Small is getting at. I don't know.
Far right often go, thanks to conversations with people who have more lived experience than you. If some guy on Twitter shoots his mouth off about how, for instance, only precious snowflakes would care about how many black women are getting roles in Hollywood, maybe you push back on that. Maybe the conversation gets heated. Maybe you debunk his arguments, make your points, and he walks away in a huff. For you, the interaction is over. But for folks on the far right, it often isn't. The far right keeps mental lists of people who represent the things they're mad about. The symbol of the liberal media, the symbol of video game feminism, the symbol of trans activism. FYI, these are usually women and people of color. And these people aren't people to them. They're just icons for a thing. And the way they express anger about those things is to attack those people. So while you leave the argument and have a lie down, eat a sandwich, feel better, he maybe vents his frustration by hacking the email of whomever represents black women in Hollywood this week. This doesn't happen every time, or even most times, but it happens reliably enough that anytime you try and debate with a reactionary, you are gambling with someone else's safety. The purpose of debating these people is not to change their minds, but to stem the flow of lies and bad rhetoric. The alt-right is always recruiting, always trying to expand its audience. And there are ways to reach their intended audience without engaging them directly. It's not only safer, it's often more effective to cut out the middleman, speak past them, not to them. If your purpose is to actually change the mind of a reactionary, well, doing that right is tricky, and doing it wrong can have serious consequences. So until you know for sure how to change the mind of a reactionary without fucking somebody else's life up, do not engage. Once you've got those 3 bits cleared up, the rest of your announcement is just housekeeping. Because there are a whole lot of topics to discuss, you'll want to keep the videos short and to the point, and you'll have to alternate them with videos in your more usual wheelhouse, or else after a few months of nothing but this, videos would just be 5-minute blocks of sustained screaming. You'll try to release them in batches when the subjects interlock, but you'll also try not to make any promises about your schedule. And you'll have to clarify that anything you say, no matter how insightful or well-researched, is ultimately your opinion, and invite people to expand or push back on your ideas, provided they can do so civilly. And you'll have to be clear that if people are coming to you for solutions, you do not, as of now, have any. You're not at solutions yet. Maybe you will be by the end of this, but for now, all you know is, if you want to win, you have to understand why you've been losing. And if you want to defeat an enemy, you have to know how your enemy thinks. Then, all that's left to say is, welcome to the alt-right playbook.
cool and sweet melon cake.